Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Let's start today's video with a story from the world of hospitality, where things can get pretty heated, literally. Imagine a bustling cafe with a young worker barely 17 learning the ropes of making the perfect coffee and a demanding customer insisting on her coffee being extra hot. But before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button, smash the like if you enjoy the content, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a juicy story. You want your coffee hot? Even hotter? How about we curdle the milk for you? This happened a few years ago when I was first starting in hospitality, but this was the best intro I ever got to what hospo is really like. It was the afternoon, and my boss was already in a cranky mood because he was teaching a 17-year-old how to use the coffee machine, which would drive anyone mad. A woman came in and ordered a dine-in coffee extra hot. He let me do the coffee while he went out back, and I made the milk to 75 degrees Celsius. For those who don't know, milk is steamed to around 65 Celsius, 149 Fahrenheit, so they should have been fine. She came back, I asked for extra hot, and this is lukewarm at best. I'm brand new at this, so my boss assumes I've made a mistake. I remake the coffee, showing him it's now at 80 Celsius, 176 Fahrenheit. He tried a bit, edit by pouring the milk into a separate first, burnt his mouth, and confirmed the thermometer was fine. I took it out to her, said sorry, came back into a life lesson from my boss saying that customers can sometimes tell when someone's new, so they prey on them. Again, the woman comes back, I come here all the time and I have never been so disappointed, or something to that effect, and storms back to her table. My boss and I are really effing confused at this point. He remakes it again. She brings it back again and begins to yell at me, full Karen style. My boss has gone to the toilet at this point. I'm 17, brand new to customer-facing jobs, and trembling and crying. Finally, my boss walks up, yanks the cup from her hand, puts it under the steam wand, and turns it on. Milk is boiling over the cup, all over the countertop and onto the floor. He just stares at her. He hands it back to her without ever breaking eye contact. Milk curdled, half a cup of liquid missing, and says, there, it's hot. I made sure of it. She was mortified. I was horrified. She sat at her table, too stunned to complain, and drank the coffee in peace. He went into the kitchen to tell the chef, and they cracked up laughing. That boss was the best and worst boss I ever had. One time we were overbooked and had to cancel the most recent reservation. They called him a C-word, so he set up their tablecloth and utensils on the ground outside the restaurant and sent them a picture confirming their booking. Was that woman an actual demon from hell? How on earth does she usually make her coffee? And our second story. Staff Sergeant instructs shaven-headed troops to put on a hat for civilian flight. I wasn't involved in this particular act, but had it recounted to me by an old-time friend. We were discussing some bad bosses we had serving in the Army, and my pal was telling me about his boss that I only knew by name and reputation. The brief outline is that back in the 1980s, British troops would sometimes fly out to Belize for jungle training on civilian flights. The minimum dress standard was collar and tie. What typically happened was a load of blokes in cheap suits would get bused from the barracks to the airport and invariably head straight for the bars to get wankered before the flight. The grown-ups were always concerned about bad behavior and the fact that potentially it could portray the Army in a bad light if there was any drunkenness or shenanigans. The day before departure, one of the troops, platoons, had all shaved their heads completely into the woods. Totally bald. Short and trimmed is acceptable. Totally bald is a big no-no. This came to light when they turned up for light PT session 24 hours before departure. The 40-ish guys were stood in a assorted civilian PT kit to find that the troop staff sergeant went totally apoplectic when he saw them, ranting and raving that they looked like effing skinhead hooligans and that they were an embarrassment, etc. The troop staff sergeant then made the glorious decision of instructing the men that rather than effing embarrassing him going through the airport like a gang of skinheads, they'd all have to wear a hat. Not so clever now, are you? Yes, they were. Next day, the ragtag shower of blokes, corporals and below, dressed in cheap nylon suits and stay-pressed trousers, met up outside the living accommodations to march round to the squadron offices, where the rest of the squadron was waiting for the coaches to arrive. As they turned the corner, the whole camp fell apart laughing as the scruffiest cheap shoes, cheap suit-wearing body of men ever assembled turned up in 3 ranks marching in perfect step wearing sombreros, Stetsons, full-face balaclavas, flat caps, woolly hats, bowler hats, top hats, and deerstalkers, and collar and tie, obviously. It was here that the squadron sergeant major stepped in and the guys were told to take the headwear off. Troops 1, Troop Staff Sergeant 0. Years later, the Troop Staff Sergeant went on to be a regimental sergeant major, and I'd like to think he tells this story from his perspective, too. Definitely was expecting the visors that were popular a while back. Basically a baseball cap without the top, so you'd still see the bald head. And our next story. You're fired for obeying my rules. Please stay until we can replace you, though. It was 2005, and the lady I'd met over the internet, having visited me in Australia, and me visiting her in the USA and meeting her folks and all that, she had now come to be with me and we had married. But since arriving to stay, she had a lot of problems as her vocational college degree was not recognized in Australia, leaving her with difficulties getting a job. She was determined and flexible, though, and did some temp jobs, clerical, receptionist kind of things, using skills she'd learned while working at college as a librarian. She finally got a real job as a receptionist/clerk at a company that brokered loans, and she got on with things. One thing that was always a problem was that sales rep/sharks would have their clients come in, and they would tell the women to make coffees for them. That wasn't part of their role, so my wife and coworkers were told that they were not to do that. It was up to the salesperson to make the coffee for themselves and clients. This was part of an initiative to try to retain women in these roles, as they didn't tend to stay long in what was something of an anarchic office. So my wife is working in a salesman. They called them financial advisors, but they were the credit business version of the used car salesman class. Client comes in and she buzzed the guy. He comes out and says to her to make them both coffees. She tried to be discreet, but said that she knew she couldn't do that. He blew up, went to her supervisor, and she told my wife to make the coffees. Later, she had her in the office and fired her. Yep, she was fired for trying to do as she was told. The opposite of malicious, I guess, but the karma comes in anyway. She was fired but asked to stay on until they got another person to replace her. For the next 2 months, she continued to go to work, now able and ready to refuse anything she didn't want to do, especially the coffee making. The same guy tried once, she said no, so fire me, LOL. They could not find a replacement. Word of their issues at that company, it got around the receptionist clerical field locally. Edit, she reminded the agency she had gotten the job through, refused to send anyone. It was the 3rd person in a row dumped when the probationary period was nearly up, so the agency was not being paid their commission. Then she was offered a much better job with some real responsibility and standing, and almost 30% more salary. Walked in the office next day and told them she was leaving at the end of the day. No notice required, of course, and they still had not gotten a replacement and didn't find one for months more, by which time they were trying to replace 2 of them. Eventually, the company let the woman's supervisor go and initiated sensible rules. My wife never looked back, but we still have a chuckle 18 years later at how well getting fired worked out for her and how badly it ended for the supervisor who fired her staff for obeying the rules. I get a feeling the supervisor thought the women don't need to make coffee rule was only for her benefit. And our last story. The HOA forbids me from building a fence. I purchased my first home in an HOA about 4 months ago in Virginia. I'm new to homeownership and living in an HOA. Before I purchased the home and while under contract, I contacted the property manager of the HOA asking if fences are allowed. They said yes. I got my HOA package literally 2 days before closing, and to my surprise, it stated that lots X and X are not allowed to have fences, and mine was one of them. At this point, I was too invested in this house, already buying appliances, buying furniture, and paid my closing costs. I contacted the property manager once again, and they confirmed that my lot is not allowed to have a fence according to the bylaws. Wish I would have told sooner when I had a chance to back out. Now, I was told by this same property manager if my goal is to have a fence, then I need to bring it up in a meeting and us homeowners will need to vote to allow this. I don't see why other homeowners wouldn't allow these 9 houses to have fences, but the issue is, as the most recent HOA meeting, only 9 people showed up besides the board members. I guess you'd consider this community townhomes, but they're only attached by these storage sheds in the back of the houses, so there's a little alley in between each house up to the back of the storage sheds. We do not share walls with each other. Tree issues. There are crepe myrtles in the backyard. Each house has 2 trees each in the back. It had an exterminator come out pretty soon after I moved in because I was having an ant issue back there, and they said the ants won't go away unless the tree's removed. The HOA claims to be responsible for taking care of our backyards of these 9 houses that cannot have fences. However, they say trimming the trees are the homeowner's responsibility. My neighbor's tree and mine are touching my house, and my neighbor's very adamant that the HOA is responsible for trimming the trees. I would like the HOA to remove the trees, but I don't mind paying to have mine removed, but then we're back to the issue that my neighbor's tree limbs are coming into my backyard and touching my house. Bushes. Since we're not allowed to have fences, they have bushes along the sidewalk that backs up to our houses. These bushes are overgrown into the sidewalk, and at the last meeting, this was a discussion that the bushes needed to be trimmed. The board stated that the landscape contractors have tried trimming them, but it's killing the bushes, so they're planning on replacing them. Who knows when? These bushes are supposed to give us privacy, but they definitely aren't. You can see right through them, and there are a lot of dead spots. Grass. We cannot grow grass back there. When I moved in, I planted about 5 pieces of sod just so that my puppy has a place to go potty. Otherwise, it's just dirt and moss back there. The trees and bushes are a big factor of not being able to grow grass back there because it's very shady and moist. Since planting my sod, it has a terrible fungus problem. Mushrooms are growing. My sod's now brown, and there's slugs everywhere. Fence. Yes, I want a fence, mostly because I have a puppy. However, I do live by myself, and like previously stated, there is a sidewalk on the other side of the bushes that are along my backyard. It's a major security issue that someone could just walk through those bushes and be at my back door. There are people constantly walking back there, and there's a popular park that road leads to which people often stop their cars doing who knows what. Additional comments. The previous homeowner had a termite issue in one of the storage sheds in the backyard. It was dealt with, but they didn't fix any damages, and I don't want to fix them until these issues are resolved. When it rains, my backyard is just flooded, and it never dries back there. It's just constantly in a moist state, and it's honestly grossing me out when I have to go out back to let my puppy out. My suggestion that I would like to bring up in the next HOA meeting would be to remove those bushes along our backyards and put white vinyl fencing, which is the type of fencing required by the HOA. There are meters back there, and gates are required by the HOA on all fences, which they could install those when putting up the fence, and then allow the homeowners to put fences up on the sides if they wish to. I'm thinking building a fence back there would be more cost-effective for the HOA than to be removing and replanting bushes along the backyards. Update. I ran to get on the board of my HOA, started attending meetings and working hard to get others involved, figured out what was needed to change the laws, and now I have a beautiful fence. But there's still work to be done. The issue of trees and lawns is still on the table. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.